Okay, we're going to use a system of equations to solve a word problem. So, in this problem it says two mechanics worked on a car. The first mechanic worked for 20 hours and the second mechanic worked for 15 hours. Together they charged a total of $3,175. What was the rate charged per hour by each mechanic if the sum of the two rates was $180 per hour? Okay, so what did I tell you was the first step in any word problem. And even if this is the only thing you can do, you will earn points for this on your test. And you will lose points for this if you don't do it on your test. So the first step is to define your variables. So you always look for the question, what were you asked to find? So in this problem, we were asked to find the rate charged per hour by each mechanic. So that means we have two things that we need to find. So we're going to have two variables. So I always choose X and Y. I'm not very creative. So I'm going to say X is the rate charged by the first mechanic. So I have a first mechanic and a second mechanic. And so then I'm going to say Y is the rate charged by the second mechanic. So always write that down, okay? Notice I didn't say X equals first mechanic and Y equals second mechanic because X and Y aren't people, they're numbers, okay? So X is the rate that's charged by the first mechanic and Y is the rate that's charged by the second mechanic. So make sure you're really clear about what your variable represents. Okay, so now we have to, since we have two unknowns, we need to have two equations. There's no way we can solve a single equation that has two variables in it. So let's look at the information again. There's a simple equation in the last sentence. So the sum of the two rates was $180 per hour. So since the two rates are X and Y, we can write down the sum, X plus Y equals 180. So that's our first equation. Now the second equation is going to be an equation that talks about how much each mechanic charged. Okay, because we are told that together they charged a total of $3,175. So let's figure out how much they each charged and add those two things together. So it looks like the first mechanic worked for 20 hours. So how much did he charge for that work? Well, his rate is X dollars per hour, right? His rate is X, and that's dollars per hour. And if he worked for 20 hours, then he charged 20 times X. The second mechanic, it looks like he only worked 15 hours, and he charged Y dollars per hour. So the total that he charged was 15 times Y. So the first mechanic charged 20 times X, second mechanic charged 15 times Y, and together the total charge was $3,175. So there's our system. Two equations, two unknowns. So we could use substitution, we could use elimination. I like to use elimination. I don't know why. So let's take that first equation and multiply it by negative 15 and add it to the second equation to get rid of the Y variable. You could have decided to multiply it by negative 20 to get rid of the X variable, or you could have decided to do substitution. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to go. But this is the way I chose to do it. So now let's rewrite the two equations. The first one is negative 15x minus 15y equals negative 2700. 180 times negative 15 is negative 2700. And the second equation, I'm just going to rewrite it the way it is. And now I'm going to add those two together. And I get 5x equals 475. Okay, and so now I just have to divide both sides by 5, and I get x is 95. So now we take that number and we go back to one of the two original equations, and I like the first one, it's simpler, and I plug in 95 for x, and now I'm going to solve that for y. So subtract 95, and I got y equals 85. So I'm not quite finished. Always remember to answer the question. So these are rates. So the first mechanic charged $95 per hour, and the second mechanic charged $85 per hour. And that's the answer. So remember, the most important step is the first step. Always write down exactly what your variables represent and be precise. And then if you end up with two variables, that means you need to have two equations. Okay? The next video will be a slightly more complicated problem with a system of equations.